Oh, hey, Spider-Man. Oh, no, you don't. Ow! What the hell, man? Wait, you're not a bad guy? No, I'm not a bad guy. I'm here to give you some news. Well, then why didn't my spider sense react to you? Well, it could have something to do with this note I have. Note? What the hell is this? I'm being replaced? Why? Hey, I'm just the messenger. Hey, look, there's someone who might know what you're going through. Huh? First time? Oh, hey guys. I'm just looking at all the Spider-Man movies I still have left to review. I mean, Brand New Day comes out in July, and I still have 5 movies to review. I mean, I'm not a fucking math whiz, but it's not looking good for me. I mean, just look at these movies. I still have to review the shitty one, the cringy one, Iron Man 4, the aura-filled one, and this one. Wait, what's this one again? Well, folks, we've now made it to The Amazing Spider-Man, the first Spider-Man film that ended up being pretty divisive among fans. You see, when this film came out, people either loved it or hated it. Why? Well, believe it or not, there was a time when the Raimi films had a lot of haters. And no, I'm not just referring to Spider-Man 3, although that certainly didn't help matters. I mean, the films in general were not liked by a group of people who criticized Tobey Maguire's performance as Spider-Man, the character of Mary Jane, and just the all-around goofiness of those films. These were the people that ended up liking The Amazing Spider-Man, because it pandered to those people. But of course, the people who liked the Raimi films didn't like this movie because it wasn't what they wanted. Raimi fans clamored for Spider-Man 4, which of course ended up being cancelled. So why did Sony end up cancelling Spider-Man 4 in favor of this movie? Spider-Man 4 was actually in development for around 3 years. It was planned to release on May 6, 2011. Not only that, but there was also plans for Spider-Man 5 and 6, as well as a Venom spin-off starring Topher Grace. Wait, how would that have worked? Last we saw, Eddie and the symbiote were both blown up. That movie would have had some serious explaining to do. Anyway, Spider-Man 4 went through several rewrites. It was initially written by James Vanderbilt in 2007, rewritten by David Lindsay-Abaire in 2008, and again by Gary Ross in 2009. Initially, Raimi expressed interest in having Dr. Connors transform into the Lizard. However, Raimi ultimately decided to go back to the Vulture idea. This time, John Malkovich was in talks to play the Vulture. Felicia Hardy was also planned to be in the movie, played by Anne Hathaway. Yes, Anne Hathaway, who would later go on to play Catwoman in The Dark Knight Rises. Funny how things work out. However, the idea for Felicia Hardy was not to have her become Black Cat, but rather an original character, the Vultress. Now, I know that sounds questionable, but this was early in development, and Raimi himself stated a few years later that if this movie had been made, Felicia Hardy would have in fact be Black Cat, so there you go. One of the coolest things about this script was that it was going to open with a montage of Spider-Man apprehending various villains, including Mysterio, who was going to be revealed as Bruce Campbell, officially confirming the fan theory of his character's various different roles in the series. I think this would have been such a clever twist. So why didn't this happen? Well, it really came down to Sam Raimi himself. He was very unhappy with Spider-Man 3, and he wanted Spider-Man 4 to be the best it could be, as a way to make up for the disappointment of the last movie. Ultimately, after going through several scripts, he was never happy with them, and decided to drop out because he didn't think he was going to be able to make the movie work on a level that he wanted it to work, especially in time for the May 6, 2011 release date. So, in January 2010, Sony officially announced that Spider-Man 4 was in fact cancelled, and that they would be rebooting the series. As much as I am disappointed that we never got a continuation of this series, I do respect Raimi for not wanting to give us something that he felt was less than great. At least we didn't get another situation like the Christopher Reeve Superman movies where they keep on making movies no matter how awful they are. Now, since this next movie would be a reboot, it would mean a new director and a new Spider-Man. Funnily enough, similar to the 2002 movie, David Fincher was one of the directors being considered for this new movie. However, the job ended up going to Mark Webb, known for the romantic comedy 500 Days of Summer. Wait, his last name is Webb?
Coincidence? I think not!
When it came to the role of Peter Parker, several actors were considered, most notably Drake Bell, who would go on to voice Peter Parker in the Ultimate Spider-Man animated series, Aaron Taylor Johnson, who would go on to play Kraven in the Kraven the Hunter movie, and one of the Jonas Brothers. Because why not? In the end, the role went to Andrew Garfield. Unlike Tobey Maguire, Garfield was a huge Spider-Man fan beforehand, so getting the role was a dream come true for him. In terms of the villain, the filmmakers decided that it was finally time for the Lizard to make his live-action debut. And thus, the movie released on July 3rd, 2012. I was 9 years old when this movie came out, but I also remember seeing the trailer for the movie in theaters. Watching this trailer, I remember my exact reaction to it. Oh my god, it's Spider-Man 4! Yeah, despite the fact that it had an entirely different cast, and was clearly not following the same story, I was under the assumption it was supposed to be Spider-Man 4. Okay, I think we've established at this point that little baby Arron didn't know how to use his brain. Now, when I finally did see the movie, I ended up liking it a lot. In fact, what if I told you that this was 9-year-old Aaron's favorite Spider-Man movie? Yeah, I liked both of the Amazing Spider-Man films when they were coming out, but the question is, has this movie remained my favorite? Well, whatever you do, don't go back and watch my Spider-Man 2 review, because that'll just spoil the answer for you. This is the Amazing Spider-Man. Let's hope it is. So instead of having the opening credits first, the movie just drops the title and then starts with a flashback of a young Peter Parker playing hide-and-seek. Who's he playing hide-and-seek with, you ask? I don't know, I guess his imaginary friend? That's what's weird about this scene. It never actually shows who Peter is playing with. He enters his dad's office and sees that it's been tampered with, and then his parents rush in to get him, and we then cut to Peter getting dropped off at his aunt and uncle's place. It's a pretty bizarre opening that doesn't really make much sense. And before you say, well, Arron, that's the point, it's meant to be a mysterious flashback. But in the context of the scene itself, the whole hide-and-seek thing doesn't make sense. Well, whatever. We then see this young Peter Parker fade into a 17-year-old Peter Parker played by Andrew Garfield, who's now in high school. Yeah, just ignore the fact that some of these kids are adults. We see that he's not great with social interactions, gets picked on by Flash Thompson, and likes to take pictures of girls without their consent. Wow, more like your friendly neighborhood creep man. We also see that Peter has a skateboard, which is interesting because, to my knowledge, this is the only interpretation of Peter Parker that uses a skateboard. Well, if you don't count Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. Peter gets beat up by Flash, and then talks to the girl he was taking pictures of, which turns out to be Gwen Stacy, played by Emma Stone. Okay, this is my first big negative with this movie, and I know a lot of people are going to disagree with me, but I'm not a big fan of this version of Gwen Stacy. Now, don't get me wrong, Gwen in these movies is a massive improvement on Gwen from Spider-Man 3, but my problem with Gwen in this movie is that she's not a very compelling character. What do we know about her? Well, her dad is captain of the police force, and she's a science major. Wait a minute, I pretty much just described Gwen Stacy's character in the comics. Huh, well, I suppose you can give them credit for having the character be accurate to the comics. Then you have my other problem with her in this movie. We're not really given a reason as to why her and Peter like each other. I guess Gwen starts liking Peter after he stands up to that kid that Flash was picking on, because she says it was brave, but that's not really a strong reason. I think they should have done something akin to the Spectacular Spider-Man animated series. What made Gwen and Peter's relationship work so well in that show was because, like Peter, Gwen was a socially awkward loser who was also into science. In this movie, Gwen isn't a socially awkward outcast like Peter is. If anything, Gwen is somewhat popular because she's later seen as Dr. Connor's assistant. So what makes her and Peter's relationship so special? When Peter comes home after school, we're introduced to Aunt May, played by Sally Field, and Uncle Ben, played by Charlie Sheen's dad. I have things to say about Aunt May, but for now, I just want to talk about Uncle Ben. Now, for those of you who are going to claim that I'm a Raimi fanboy and that I'm not being fair to this movie, Well, there's actually a couple things that this movie does better than the first Raimi film, and one of those things is Uncle Ben. I actually like Martin Sheen as this character. Cliff Robertson in the 2002 film only had a couple scenes dedicated to him before he dies. He was just kinda there to service the origin. Martin Sheen's Uncle Ben gets a little more screen time in this movie, and I really like the scenes of him talking to Peter. They take a little bit more time with his character, and I do appreciate that. I actually do think he's the superior Uncle Ben because he actually seems like a real person. So after helping Uncle Ben with the flood in the basement, Peter finds a briefcase belonging to his father. Okay, we're back to the negatives with this movie, and this is something that's a problem with both of these movies. The focus on Peter's parents. You see, this movie was being marketed as the untold story, referring to Peter's parents, which the Raimi films never touched on. But here's the thing, there's a reason why the Raimi films never touched on Peter's parents. Yes, in the comics, Peter's parents did die in a plane crash. And yes, they were government spies. But they're not important characters. The only time in the comics when Peter's parents had a big role was that time in the 90s when Chameleon made androids of them. But other than that arc, his parents are a cliff note. For some reason, both of the Amazing Spider-Man movies have Peter's parents, and especially his father, play a significant role in the story. Now, this is a bigger problem in the sequel, so I'll save most of my thoughts for that, but for now, I'll just say that this is extremely unnecessary, and Peter trying to find out more about his parents is something I just don't care for. It kinda just feels like the filmmakers wanted to include Peter's parents in this first movie, simply to make it different from the Raimi films. Like I said, a lot of the marketing for this movie was focused on the truth about Peter's parents, yet by the end, we don't even get many answers. Peter finds out that Dr. Connors, played by Rhys Ifans, worked with his father, so he goes to Oscorp where Dr. Connors works. He runs into Gwen, who happens to be Dr. Connors' head intern. Peter also bumps into another Oscorp employee who seems to have information on Peter's father. The employee informs Dr. Connors that Norman Osborn is dying, and that he has to work faster on a cure to save him. Yes, Norman Osborn is dying in this movie. Why? I don't know, he's just dying, and Peter never meets him in this series of films. He never meets his arch-nemesis. That would be like if Batman never met the Joker, or if Superman never met Lex Luthor. Again, they're trying to be different from the Raimi films and avoid things we've seen before. You know, ignoring the fact that they're still doing things we've seen before, such as starting with Peter in high school. But if you want to do something different with the Norman Osborn character, here's an idea. Instead of having him be the first villain Peter faces, build up Norman Osborn throughout each movie, and then have Peter face him in the third or fourth movie. That would have been pretty satisfying. So Peter decides to sneak around Oscorp and finds a room with a bunch of spiders. He walks in and touches something that makes all the spiders drop onto him. After brushing them off, he meets with Gwen, but it turns out one of the spiders is still on him and ends up biting him. This is an aspect of the origin that I'm not a fan of. I like the idea that Peter getting bit was a complete accident and was out of his control. This is why I like the way the Raimi film handles it. But in this movie, Peter straight up just walks into a room full of loose spiders, so it doesn't come as a surprise that he gets bit. It was almost like he was asking for it. We then get a scene of Peter falling asleep on the subway ride home, and this is when he first displays his newfound agility and sticking abilities. He showcases his stickiness by ripping a girl's shirt off. This scene is also edited really weird. It has a lot of these quick cuts. It's really distracting. So Peter makes it home and has a big appetite.
I got it.
You took the frozen macaroni and cheese?
I noticed that.
Hey, his behavior might seem strange, but at least he's not ripping your shirt off. The next day, Peter decides to visit Dr. Connors at his home. Dr. Connors tells him about his theory of cross-species genetics, and Peter is able to help him with a formula. Then we have Peter at school defending some girl after Flash ruins her painting. After all, with great power comes great basketball skills. Damn, Peter could have become the amazing basketball man with those skills. Uncle Ben comes to the school and isn't too happy with Peter's basketball skills. He seems to be upset with Peter for wanting to get even with Flash. Yeah, I want you to keep this in mind for later. Uncle Ben is upset because Peter got revenge on someone. Uncle Ben sees Gwen and recognizes her as the girl Peter has on his computer.
He's got you on his computer.
Character. It's my uncle. He's a pathological liar, and he thought you were someone else.
Wow, so the girl you like is aware that you have a picture of her as your computer wallpaper. To quote Doc Ock, let's see you scurry out of this.
I took a photo of the debate team, and you're in the debate team, so...
Right.
I was touching up stuff.
You're touching up stuff.
Come on. I'm not gonna answer that.
Oh my god. It's bad enough he takes pictures of her without consent, but now he neither confirms nor denies touching up stuff? All jokes aside, another problem I have with this movie is the scenes of Peter and Gwen's intimate moments. And I know some of you are immediately going to think, Arron, what are you talking about? Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone have great chemistry. But let me be clear, my problem with these scenes isn't the acting. You can tell that these actors do like each other. Hell, Garfield and Stone began dating in real life. The problem with these scenes is that I can't stand the dialogue. I refuse to believe that this was actually written in the script. These lines had to be improvised. Peter and Gwen are simply just talking. Not about anything in particular, but just saying words.
You want to, I don't know. We could, Okay, I gotta tell you this one thing.
What?
And again, before you say, well, Arron, the dialogue is supposed to be like this to show Peter's social awkwardness. I get that, but as a result, these scenes are not very enjoyable to watch because the characters are constantly repeating themselves, and it makes for a really dull scene. It actually reminds me of the Ultimate Spider-Man comic books back when Brian Michael Bendis was writing them. Now, don't get me wrong, I certainly don't hate the Ultimate Spider-Man comics, but one of my biggest problems, and my problem with Bendis' writing in general, is that he constantly has the characters repeat themselves, and it does get a little annoying after a while. Now, if this is Mark Webb trying to adapt the feel of Ultimate Spider-Man, well then, he did a good job because this shit is just as bad as the dialogue in the comics. These scenes aren't doing anything to advance the story. It's just simply Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone pretending to like each other, and while they do a good job at doing that, it doesn't make for an entertaining romance. So Peter visits Dr. Connors and learns more about his plan for cross-species genetics. He specifically wants to use a lizard's DNA to regrow his missing arm. Uh-oh, my comic book senses are tingling. Peter gets home, but it turns out he forgot to pick up Aunt May and gets a lecture from Uncle Ben. Again, this is another scene that makes me like this version of Uncle Ben. Instead of having him just say, with great power comes great responsibility, the dialogue here feels a lot more natural, and it's actually ripped straight from the Ultimate Spider-Man comics. To me, this is one of the smartest things the movie does. Not only does it make comic book fans happy, but it also just flows well as a scene. So Peter, frustrated with his daddy issues, storms off and Uncle Ben goes to look for him. Peter ends up at a convenience store trying to buy some milk, but finds that he doesn't have enough money, so when the owner gets robbed, Peter doesn't intervene, and this leads to Uncle Ben running into the robber and gets his ass shot trying to grab the gun from him. Yeah, pretty dumb move on Uncle Ben's part, but Peter finds his body and the police arrive at the Parker home to give them a police sketch of the robber. Oh no, this is the moment Peter is going to realize that the killer is the same guy he ran into at the store. How's he going to take this? Peter? Hello? No reaction from you, huh? Okay, well, I only assume he'll process that later. The next day at school, we actually get one of my favorite moments in the whole movie. Flash actually apologizes to Peter after hearing about his uncle. It's a really nice moment that shows Flash isn't just a one-dimensional bully character, and I will say that this version of Flash is actually my favorite. The Flash we got in the Raimi films was pretty much a one-dimensional generic jock character that was only memorable for some of his lines. Flash in The Amazing Spider-Man feels more realistic, and is even shown to be a big Spider-Man fan at the end of the film, just like the comics. Oh, and he also isn't super fucking annoying like the MCU Flash, but I'll get to that eventually. But now it's time for Peter to actually become Spider-Man. And here's my big problem with the origin story in this movie. You know, other than the fact that it was completely unnecessary. What makes Peter decide to become Spider-Man? Well, in the comics and, most adaptations, Peter becomes Spider-Man after finding out that the guy who killed Uncle Ben is the same guy who he let escape. He could have used his powers to stop him, but he didn't. Thus, he finally learns Uncle Ben's lesson: with great power must also come great responsibility. This is something the Amazing Spider-Man absolutely fails to understand. First of all, as I showed earlier, Peter never has that realization moment that Uncle Ben's killer is the same guy he let escape, because he already knows who Uncle Ben's killer is. He was given the fucking police sketch. So Peter decides to hunt this guy down and starts beating up various criminals in an attempt to find the killer, who has a star tattoo on his wrist. And guess what? Not only does he never find the killer in this movie, but there's never a scene where Peter thinks to himself, oh my god, I'm partially responsible for Uncle Ben's death. There's never a scene where he actually learns his lesson. So to answer the question, why does Peter become Spider-Man? Well, if we go off of this movie, Peter becomes Spider-Man out of revenge. Remember that scene talked about earlier where Uncle Ben is upset with Peter's basketball incident? Yeah, that was Peter getting revenge on Flash, which means Peter becoming Spider-Man in this movie, if anything, goes against Uncle Ben. Peter in this movie is taking the wrong lesson from Uncle Ben. What kind of back-ass-words bullshit is that? So not only was this origin story unnecessary, it's the worst way they could have handled it. And you want to know what the saddest part of this is? This is not the worst Spider-Man movie. Oh, God. Okay, so after all the bullshit revenge stuff, we finally see Peter in costume. In regard to the costume in this movie, I think it's pretty nice. The blue on the costume really pops, and I like the really long spider symbol on the front and back. My only problem is the mask, because I really don't like that the lenses have this yellow tint to them. I don't think it fits the look at all. It's also noteworthy to mention that this version of Peter Parker actually makes mechanical web shooters, unlike Maguire's Peter, who has organic webs. This is something that was shown off in the trailer, and it made a lot of comic book fans happy to see. So it's here that we see Peter apprehend someone in costume for the first time.
I was going more for one of the guys who do the luge. Good thinking, good thinking. Use the window. Get out the window. There you go, you got it. Whoa.
Am I watching Spider-Man or fucking Batman? Why the fuck does he just disappear from the car? And what's even weirder about this scene is that Spider-Man also cracks jokes, which does make sense. He is Spider-Man after all. But why are they also trying to make him scary in this scene? He's cracking jokes while also trying to intimidate this car thief and disappearing like he's fucking Batman. Are we supposed to be laughing or scared during this scene? Now, to be fair, I actually do think this scene is pretty funny, whether it be intentional or, unintentional. But now that Peter is fully Spider-Man, it's time for me to give my thoughts on Andrew Garfield as this character. Now, I first want to be clear about something. My thoughts on Garfield's take on the character is a little different in the sequel, so I just want you to keep in mind that when I tell you what I think about him, I'm referring only to this first movie. With that being said, I think he's pretty okay. Andrew Garfield is a very good actor, and he does a good job playing a socially awkward nerd. I do really like some of his moments when he's joking around as Spider-Man. One of my favorite lines from Garfield's Spider-Man is when he swings away from police and says in a New York accent, I'm swinging here, I'm swinging here. It's actually become one of my favorite Spider-Man lines, period. Andrew Garfield also studied the movements of spiders for his performance, and the way he moves around in costume the way a spider would is something unique to his portrayal, so I appreciate the effort. But my problem with Garfield's portrayal is that I don't really like him as Peter Parker. And no, it's not because he doesn't look like a nerd, whatever the hell that means. Garfield's performance is good, and my problem isn't really with him specifically, but rather all the stuff I talked about earlier with the origin, and the fact that I don't find him very charming as Peter Parker. I mentioned in my review of the first Raimi film that one of the reasons I liked Tobey Maguire is because I found him charming as the character. I know I joked about this earlier in the review, but it also doesn't help that Peter in this movie comes across as a bit of a creep. So my problems with the character in this movie aren't all due to the performance, but rather the writing for Peter. Garfield can be pretty fun when he's in costume, however, and that's certainly the highlight of his portrayal in this movie. So next, we get a scene of the Oscorp guy I mentioned earlier getting frustrated with Dr. Connor's lack of progress. He wants to start human trials, and after Dr. Connors refuses, he gets fired. As Gwen invites Peter over for dinner, Dr. Connors decides to test the serum on himself, which appears to work perfectly at first, but as we all know, there has to be a villain in this movie, so the serum ends up having devastating side effects. Peter arrives at Gwen's place through her bedroom window like the creep he is, and meets Gwen's father, Police Captain George Stacy, played by Dennis Leary. And hey, look at that, we have another connection to the Halloween movies. One of Gwen's brothers is played by Skylar Gazondo, who also played Tommy Doyle in Rob Zombie's Halloween. Anyway, Peter ends up arguing with Captain Stacy over whether Spider-Man is a good guy or not.
This guy wears a mask like an outlaw. He's hunting down a bunch of criminals that all look the same, like he's got some sort of personal vendetta. But he's not protecting innocent people, Mr. Parker.
It's actually kind of funny that Captain Stacy says that, because while the movie obviously wants the audience to see Spider-Man as the hero, due to the whole reason why Peter is doing this, I tend to actually side with Captain Stacy. He's not trying to save innocent people, he's trying to hunt down his uncle's killer, so it is just a personal vendetta. This movie's writing is very weird. Gwen and Peter then go out to the roof, and this is where Peter decides to tell Gwen that he is in fact the outlaw that the police are after. I don't really know how I feel about this. I get not wanting to repeat the Raimi films and waiting till the end of the second movie for Mary Jane to find out he's Spider-Man, but as a result of Peter immediately telling Gwen that he's Spider-Man, it's not very satisfying. But this moment ends up being interrupted as Dr. Connors transforms into a giant green dinosaur man and starts throwing vehicles from a bridge. Man, don't you just hate it when your makeout session is interrupted by a giant green dinosaur man? Okay, so Peter goes to the bridge and starts saving a bunch of people, which leads into one of the best scenes in the movie. Peter ends up saving this little kid from a car that catches fire. In order to make the kid less afraid of him, Peter gives him his mask to wear and encourages him to climb out. It's a really great moment, and just goes to show the potential of Garfield's portrayal. The next day, Peter is talking to Gwen during a football game, telling her about the dinosaur on the bridge.
I gotta go after it.
That's not your job.
Maybe it is.
Okay, there you go. Peter is finally looking at Spider-Man as his responsibility instead of for revenge. Why was this not mentioned earlier? Peter visits Dr. Connors, and this is when he gets the suspicion that he might just be the dinosaur man. After telling Captain Stacy about this, Peter follows a trail of lizards down to the sewer. I will give credit where it's due. Peter using his web net to feel for vibrations of the lizard is a great way of showing his intelligence. But it's here that we get our first good look at the lizard.
You stopped me once. You won't stop me again. I'm getting stronger every day!
Wow, so that's the lizard, huh? Okay, first off, while I can understand the filmmakers wanting to go for a more realistic design for the lizard, it just comes across as boring. But the thing is, if you're gonna go for a more realistic design, why is he so fucking goofy in this movie? The lizard has to be one of my least favorite villains from the comics, mainly because a lot of his stories are exactly the same. Dr. Connors transforms into the lizard, and now wants to turn all of the people of New York into lizards, unless Spider-Man can transform him back. Not only did it get really repetitive, but a lot of these early issues with the lizard were some of the most goofy Spider-Man stories. I feel like this movie could have done something more creative with the lizard than just adapting the early 60s and 70s lizard stories. Because that's the lizard's evil plan in this movie. He wants to turn everyone into lizards because the reptilian side of him feels they are superior to humans. Now, not all lizard stories are bad, but the best lizard stories tend to take the character in a different direction and don't just dumb him down where he just wants to regrow his missing arm, and then the lizard takes over his mind like this movie does. And that's another thing that's confusing about this movie. The tone is all over the place. I touched on this with the car thief scene, but it's like they don't know what tone to go with. Do they want it to be fun and goofy, or do they want it to be dark and gritty? Well, they try to do both in this movie, and it doesn't really work well. If you're wondering why 90% of the Spider-Man scenes take place at night, there's a reason for that. After seeing the success of The Dark Knight, Sony wanted to make this movie have a similar tone and feel as The Dark Knight. But the problem is that it doesn't work for a character like Spider-Man, which is why the tone in this movie is all over the place. At one point you have Spider-Man disappearing into the night trying to intimidate a criminal, and then the next moment you have a fucking giant green dinosaur man trying to turn New York into lizards. Once again, I'd just like to point out that this is not the worst Spider-Man movie. So after the fight in the sewer, it turns out Peter left his camera behind, which says property of Peter Parker on it. Wow, this Peter really doesn't care about his secret identity. Because of this, the lizard ends up going to Peter's school and causing a shit ton of damage. We do get a pretty decent fight between them, and a nice moment of Stan Lee unknowingly being saved by Spider-Man.
I'm gonna throw you out the window now.
Yeah, just toss her out a window. I'm sure you'll always catch her. So Gwen goes to Oscorp to create an antidote, while Peter tracks the lizard, but it turns out the lizard is already on the way to Oscorp. Now, to be fair, despite my complaints about Gwen in this movie, it is refreshing to see Peter's love interest actually able to defend herself and use her intelligence to get out of a dangerous situation. Peter tries to get to Oscorp but is stopped by police, and Captain Stacy is able to unmask him. Peter is able to convince Captain Stacy to let him go, but he does end up taking a bullet, which causes his swinging to be off a bit. That's when the father of the kid he saved earlier sees this and decides to get all of his Crane buddies together in order to give Spider-Man an easy path towards Oscorp. Now's a good time to mention the music, which is composed by James Horner. The music is another highlight of the movie. It uses a lot of down piano tunes, which I absolutely love. I also like the main theme for the movie, which instead of having a mythical feel to it like Danny Elfman's theme, it has a more emotional and hopeful feel to it, and I think both themes work very well for the character. So Captain Stacy arrives at Oscorp and takes the antidote from Gwen. Peter arrives to fight the lizard and gets some assistance from Captain Stacy. Peter manages to dispense the antidote while Captain Stacy tries to handle the lizard. Although this doesn't end up going well as the lizard impales him. The antidote falls onto the city, curing everyone who's been exposed to, well, lizard disease, I guess, including Dr. Connors. Peter stays with Captain Stacy, who in his dying breath makes Peter promise him something.
You're gonna make enemies. People will get hurt. I want you to promise me something, okay? Leave Gwen out of it.
This promise is a bit different in the comics. When Captain Stacy died in the comics, he has Peter promise to take good care of Gwen. In fact, comic book Captain Stacy in general is very different from the one we get in this movie. Dennis Leary's Captain Stacy is against masked vigilantes and wants Spider-Man out of the picture. In the comics, Captain Stacy is an older, retired officer who is a very perceptive character. He manages to figure out that Peter is Spider-Man, and is actually one of Spider-Man's biggest supporters, but he never tells Peter that he knows he's Spider-Man until he dies. That's why I feel his death in the comics is way more impactful than it is in this movie. Gwen, after the funeral, goes to see Peter and is upset as he's the only one who didn't attend. Peter tells her that he can't see her anymore, and this leads to Aunt May giving Peter some advice?
I'm just no good for her.
Peter Parker, if there's one thing you are, it's good. Anyone has a problem with that can talk to me.
You serious?
Wow, that has to be one of the worst Aunt May lines I've ever heard. See, this is why I wanted to wait to talk about Aunt May, because when it comes to this first movie, she doesn't really do anything. Throughout the movie, Peter comes home with various bruises, and Aunt May is worried. That's all she does in this movie, and her line at the end about Peter being good is really terrible. It's like they put no thought into Aunt May's character. Peter listens to Uncle Ben's voice message, which encourages him to continue being Spider-Man. He ends up late for class, but promises that it won't happen again.
Don't make promises you can't keep, Mr. Parker.
Yeah, but those are the best kind.
Okay, class, open your books. Let's begin on page 1.
Oh, well, so much for that, I guess. We then close out the movie with a final swing, of course taking place at night, because what can I say, folks, it has to be dark. Okay, fine, I will admit that is a pretty cool shot to end on. But it's not over yet, folks, as this was the first Spider-Man movie to have a mid-credits scene.
Hello, Doctor. Did you tell the
boy the truth about his father.
Oh god, a mysterious man in black? It's Halloween 5 all over again. This mysterious man in black seems to have information on Peter's parents, but like I said earlier, this movie doesn't give us any answers. Also, how the fuck does he just appear and disappear like that? Oh, who the fuck cares? The movie is over. So that was The Amazing Spider-Man. This movie sucks and I'm not sorry. Look, I'm aware that this movie certainly has its fans, and just like I did when I rewatched the first Raimi film, I tried going into this movie with an open mind. I really did try to give it a chance, and I was actively looking for things to praise, but unfortunately, I really struggled. This movie does have the best interpretations of both Uncle Ben and Flash Thompson, but then again, that's not really saying much. Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone do have a lot of chemistry, but while some people find their scenes cute, I find them painful and dull. Garfield does a good job with the material he's given, but the writing for his character's motivation is all over the place. The Lizard has to be the goofiest live-action Spider-Man villain, and he just feels completely out of place in this movie that's also trying to be dark and gritty. The whole untold story about Peter's parents is pretty much forgotten about and really only feels like a marketing gimmick. Aunt May is given nothing to do, and Sally Field's talent is pretty much wasted in this movie. The origin story takes up an unnecessary amount of the runtime, and is a complete misunderstanding of the whole point of Peter being Spider-Man. They try to make this movie different from the Raimi films, which I can understand, but most of the changes just end up being worse. This movie does have some great moments here and there, and James Horner's music is great, but that's not enough for me to give this a positive score. I'm gonna give The Amazing Spider-Man a 5 out of 10. This movie is just forgettable. No matter what you think of the other Spider-Man movies, they at least stand out in some way. The Amazing Spider-Man doesn't stand out. It's just another Spider-Man origin story not done nearly as good. And Andrew Garfield, being a huge Spider-Man fan, certainly deserved better.
Yeah, I know.
But hey, there is another Spider-Man movie starring Andrew, huge Spider-Man fan Garfield. So join me next time when I review The Amazing Spider-Man 2. And all I have to say about that is, you like that, Spidey?
I like it a lot, Max. Good.